So this story is not really as spectacular as the other stories that you may find on Reddit, though it was disturbing enough that I remember the event in vivid detail. It is somewhat long, but I will try to condense it to the point it doesn't bore you. The cast is myself, my sister, S, and the older dude, Carl. Not his real name, but will be used for the sake of the story. This happened when I was around the age of 14 to 15. I went to a theme park, Great America, with my older sister, who was around the age of 17 to 18 at the time. S pestered me to go onto a ride that I was not comfortable riding at the time until I finally budged and said I'd go with her. While we stood in line, S and I heard Carl yelling about his favorite sport teams to seemingly nobody. He was with a group of girls, so we assumed he was just having a good time with his friends, but that was not the case. Anyway, S and I got on the ride from start to finish. The ride itself was a pirate ship that basically swung back and forth, similar to a pendulum, and eventually started to do complete circles, causing passengers to temporarily hang upside down. The ride itself isn't really that key to the story besides the fact that I was nauseous after the ride. After the ride finished, I noticed that the girls that were previously with Carl left him while yelling that he was a weirdo. I didn't really pay much attention to them because my stomach was acting up, but I guess I should have. At the time, S and I were standing on top of a bridge, and I told S that I needed a minute. I walked over to the railing of the bridge and leaned over to get some fresh air. Basic breathing stuff, really. This is where the story gets weird. While leaning over the railing, I feel big arms suddenly wrap around my waist, and then I am hoisted into the air. Initially, I am freaking out and trying to comprehend what is actually happening to me at that moment. All I really know is that I am in the air, and I'm not exactly sure why. I thought that whoever was holding me up was going to throw me over the bridge, but instead they just put me down on the ground. I instantly whip around to see Carl standing there and smiling at me. S runs over to stand beside me and asks Carl why he lifted me into the air. I was sorta in a state of shock at the time and couldn't speak. The following conversation ensued. It was a while ago, so this is going to be from memory. S, why did you lift a Quixim into the air? Carl, he looked like he was sick and needed some fresh air. S, tell me how lifting someone into the air is going to help with a sickness. Carl ignores question, looks at me, and asks me how I am doing. I ignored the question and just continued to look away from him since my sister was doing all the talking. Carl, come on kid, look at someone when they speak to ya. You bored or something? I bet you're bored going on rides with your, asterisk. He looks at my sister, asterisk friend? Sibling? It doesn't matter. I heard her screaming her lungs out on that ride we all just went on, and I bet she doesn't want to go on any more of the scary rides. Yeah, she's no fun. You probably will have to go home soon because of her. No, my sister was screaming a lot on the ride, but she told me that she screams on rides because it raises her adrenaline levels, causing her to have more fun. S, leave him alone. What we do is none of your business. Carl. Oh, but it is. I want everyone that comes to this park to have a good time. I mean, it's Great America. Tell you what, kid, he was referring to me. How about you and I go to the water park and ditch your little friend here? She's not going to have much fun getting wet anyway, but trust me, we will. We can both go on all the water rides that you want, and afterwards I can take you out wherever you want to go grab lunch. I don't know what you all think about an old random man asking a 14 to 15-year-old to go out with him, but I instantly thought the dude was trying to kidnap me. So I feel that this guy is a danger to myself and possibly S, so I made a movement to walk away from him. Carl subtly stepped in front of me to block my path of exit. Again, we are standing on a bridge, so I had to think of another way that we could get past him. I feigned getting a phone call from my parents and say, "Me, hi mom. Oh yeah, my sister and I were just getting off of the pirate ship ride. Well, you're waiting right outside the ride near the food court. Okay, my sister, and I will meet you there right now. See you soon." I said it in a loud enough voice that Carl could hear everything that transpired, and, with my newfound confidence, pushed past Carl. S, and I walked away from Carl in the direction that my feigned mother was waiting. After we walked for about 10 to 15 seconds, we both broke out in a sprint until we reached the park entrance. We tried to tell the front desk people about the guy, but they said since nothing really happened that they could not do anything. So, creepy old man who literally picked me up, let's not meet. This happened when I was around 11 or 12 during the summer holidays. About me at the time. Male, about 5 feet tall, out of shape, and very shy. I was traveling with my parents in Europe, and we had been to Barcelona and Paris before, with our next destination being Tarragona, in Spain, where an amusement park called PortAventura was located. We had scheduled to stay there in one of the hotels for 4 days to visit the park, water park, and beach club. Now, the story I'm about to tell happened on the 3rd day in the main park. It was getting late, and most of the areas of the park were closed, except for the Mediterranean area, as a show with fountains, lights, and fireworks was being held over the lake that night, as it was the week of the park's anniversary. I asked my parents if we could stay and watch the show, but they were much too tired after an entire day of running around the amusement park and needed to go to the information desk to make sure the things we had bought were properly sent to our hotel room. I begrudgingly obliged. As we were at the information center, I felt the need to go to the bathroom. Asked my mother if I could go, and where the nearest one was. Turns out, the closest one is at the edge of the Mediterranean area. My parents were busy at the info desk, and I have no siblings, so they just told me to go alone. I wish I had waited for them to be done, so I could have gone with my dad because what transpired was pretty traumatizing. So I navigated back to the Mediterranean area and to the bathrooms. The whole area was pretty busy, and lots of people were crowded by the edge of the lake to watch the show that was about to begin. I entered the bathroom and went on with my business at an urinal, until I noticed a man looking towards me. I normally don't like when people stare at me, as I was shy, but this time, instead of embarrassed, I felt in danger. I glanced back at the man. He was about 6 feet tall, about mid-20s with a well-built physique, very short hair, almost shaved, Caucasian, wearing a gray hoodie, dark blue jeans, and black leather boots. It immediately struck me as the kind of person you wouldn't find in an amusement park. He was standing in front of the second urinal as if using it, but I had the feeling he wasn't. I noticed him glancing over at me a few more times. I was done and eager to leave. I tried to pass behind him, and as I did, I noticed he tried to reach for me. I barely avoided his hand, and he grunted, while I made a whimpering noise. The bathroom was very crowded, so no one noticed it. As I neared the exit, he left his urinal. I left the restrooms and looked over at the lake. The show had started. There were images being displayed on the water of the fountains with a projector, and loud music was blasting on all the speakers. I tried to blend into the crowd, hoping to lose him. After about a minute of making my way through the cluster of people, I looked back. Not 10 meters, aprox. 32 feet behind me, there he was, following behind me through the same paths between the herd that I had cut through. He now had his hood up, covering his face, but I could feel him staring me down. I also noticed he was now wearing what I think were black fingerless gloves. Alarms were going off in my head as my previous stance on this situation went from weird and creepy to dangerous. I turned and started to desperately get to an area I could run away in. After about 15 more seconds of squeezing through people, I reached the final stretch of the lakeside pathway. It was empty, too far away from the main show for anyone to be there, yet the speakers were still playing loudly here. Ahead was a maintenance side path with the gate slightly ajar, and to the left was a turn leading back to the plaza with the info central building. I ran as fast as my asthmatic, out-of-shape self could towards the turn. I could hear this man running behind me, his boots getting louder and louder behind me. He was gaining on me. I started to panic and ran even faster than I thought I could, but he was still getting closer. I had reached the turn and changed directions so fast I leaned towards the ground and nearly slipped. I felt motion behind me, as if someone had taken a swing at me, and I could hear the man complain in a language I didn't recognize. My working theory is that it was Russian, but it was some Slavic dialect for sure. I kept running through the plaza, directly to the information building, but I didn't hear the man running anymore. I turned around and saw him slip into the service gate at the end of a street. I ran inside the building and grabbed my mom's leg, stuttering and almost crying, but she was occupied with the lady at the counter, and though she saw me distressed, told me to go sit and wait and tell her when we left. I tried to protest, but she wouldn't listen and was paying keen attention to the lady. As I walked over to sit on one of the chairs, I looked out the door and scanned the plaza with my eyes. I didn't notice anything at first and almost looked away, but I saw something behind a direction sign posted next to a tree in the most remote and dark corner of the plaza. It was the man. It felt like we made eye contact. I turned away and sat in the chair furthest from the entrance. When we were leaving, I looked over in the same direction again, and he wasn't there anymore. I told my parents, but since I had a vivid imagination as a kid, they chalked it up to me being paranoid because I was alone, and that, even if it were real, there were way too many witnesses for someone to try and pull something of the sort. I wasn't happy to be called a liar about this, but considering how thick-skulled my parents can be, I didn't insist. I was just happy to have gone unscathed. I had tried to forget this encounter and was successful, but having run into this subreddit and other similar stories of near kidnappings, this resurfaced in my mind, and I decided to post it. As I was typing my story out, I realized how bad my situation was. The people around at the time were distracted by the show, so no one would have seen me get taken, and with the loud music, no one would have heard me scream or struggle. And the fact that Maintenance Gate was open and I saw the man enter it means I almost ran right to where he wanted me. To think that I almost got kidnapped right next to a crowd of people, it boggles my mind. I've never gone alone anywhere in amusement parks since. To preface this, I was a 16-year-old female. I'm quite petite and generally not intimidating. I went to an amusement park with my two friends who we'll call John and Lucas. John is a 6 feet 6 inches dude. Lucas is 6 feet 1 inch and built like a fucking tank. He actually ended up making it into the Marine Corps. Needless to say, my 5 feet 1 inch 110 pounds ass was well protected. We'd had a fun day at the park. It was getting dark and most of the kids had gone home. We were on our way out when John and Lucas needed to use the restroom. The restrooms were those shitty little shacks, and the one the guys chose was in a desolate corner. I didn't need to go, so I waited outside. John and Lucas hadn't been gone for more than 30 seconds when a stench hit me. I heard footsteps and turned to see a tall, bulky man in a tattered hoodie. The smell was like a mix of severe body odor and urine. I figured he was homeless. I have huge passion for working with the homeless population, so I smiled at him and tried to ignore the odor. Hey girlie. I was turned off by that, but decided not to let that deter me. I was pretty naive at the time. Hi. Do you need anything? His eyes lit up, but not in a good way. He looked like a kid who'd just gotten a mischievous idea. My car broke down. I live out of it, and I don't have the money to pay for anything. Could you come and help me? A few red flags came up with that. 1. Why wouldn't he ask one of the many security guards or employees right by the general parking lot? 2, and most importantly, what the fuck was he doing in a parking lot that cost $20 and an amusement park that cost $45? I thought about offering him some money, but I was already pretty short on cash as it was. Sorry, sir. I don't know anything about cars. He stepped way too close to me so that he was looming over me. He grabbed my arm. Hard. It fucking hurt. I don't know why I didn't scream, but I just froze. I was like a deer in the headlights, just staring at him in fear. Before he could do anything else, I heard the most relieving thing ever. What the fuck do you think you're doing? It was John and Lucas. Lucas, who'd always been a bit temperamental and overprotective, stormed towards this guy. John backed him up, rising to full height. The guy immediately let go and backed up. Hey guys. She was just offering to help me with my car. John and Lucas looked at me. All I could do was shake my head. Lucas grabbed the guy by the hoodie and pulled him close. You lay a finger on her or anyone else, I'll find you and fucking gut you. I noticed that Lucas had pulled out one of his pocket knives. The dude seemed to notice too, so he turned and ran, metaphorical tail between his legs. Lucas and John comforted me, reported it to security, got me back to the car, and took me home. I told my mom about the situation and asked if they could stay over. She said yes. I didn't sleep much, but thanks to Lucas and John, I did sleep. I never found out if the guy showed his face again or got caught. Even so, creepy, smelly perv, let's not meet. I had completely forgotten about this until just now. I live in Florida, so my family takes a lot of trips to Disney World, and normally I actually feel pretty safe there, despite there being a lot of strange people wandering around. I was 10 or 11 on this particular trip, and we were at Animal Kingdom, specifically in the prehistoric play area for kids. My parents were tired of following us around, so they said they were going to sit in a shady spot and let me and my younger sister walk over to the sand pit where you're supposed to be excavating dinosaur bones. Normally, they wouldn't let us leave their site like that, but we had a pair of walkie-talkies and the place was only like a 30-second walk away. So anyway, once we got there, I radioed them to tell them that we were there. We were playing in the sand for about 5 minutes when static came over the radio and I took it out of my pocket, expecting them to tell us it was time to come back, but the voice that came over the radio waves was not my dad's and it said, "I see you in Dino Land." Needless to say, we noped so hard out of that sand pit, and our parents met us halfway between where we were and where they were. The really creepy part, though, is when I radioed to tell them we got to the sand pit, I never said where we actually were, just that we were here. Hello, my English is shit, but I have a story for you guys. This took place around 2 years ago. I was driving to work, a 5-hour drive. It was already dark. About 3 hours of driving, I started to get tired. I bought myself a coffee and some snacks at a gas station and went on. But snacks and coffee can only keep you awake for so long, and I started to feel tired again. This part of the road was nothing but thick, dark pinewood forest around me. No other cars on the road, nothing, only insects smashing my windshield now, and then an empty road. I was now extremely tired, and at one point I nearly drove off the road, for almost falling asleep. I have to sleep now. I can't wait for a gas station. I need to stop as soon as I see a place where I can park my car, anything. When I'm tired, I fall asleep really fast. If I'm tired enough, I can fall asleep in the middle of a sentence when I am talking, so it's a bit urgent for me to find a place where I can stop. It felt like an hour, but probably just 5 minutes go by, and I spot this little pocket in the road. It has like a parking space for quick stops, like peeing, switching drivers, or stuff like that, not even a real resting area. I stopped here, turned down my windows to check if I heard any weird noises, total silence. I turn up the windows again. Nothing bad is gonna happen. I haven't seen a car for like 30 minutes. This road is empty. If someone is checking out my car, I bet it is the cops checking on me if I am alright. I leave my keys in the ignition and I lock the doors, just to be safe. I adjust my seat a bit to make it more comfortable to sleep in, and I take off my shoes and put them on the passenger seat on the right. It is so nice to close my eyes and I instantly fall asleep. I don't know why, but something wakes me up. I can't really see anything. Some kind of bright light hits me in the eyes. First I thought it was a flashlight, but then I realized it is the high beams from another car in my rear view mirror that is blinding me. I look in my left mirror and I see a dude walking up beside my car. Maybe he wants help with something? Should I make it clear to him that I'm in here? He is right beside my left back door. Should step out and ask what he's doing? I didn't have to. The dude proceeds to jerk and pull on my left back door. I almost shit my fucking pants when I realize that he is trying to force his way into my car. My seat is adjusted for me to lay down and I pushed it back max. I can't reach the pedals, which makes it impossible for me to drive my car. I slam the car horn and it breaks the silence with a roar, and the dude jumps. That gives me like 2 seconds to push my seat to reach the pedals, but it is still way out of adjustment, so I'm kind of pulling myself to the steering wheel because my seat is laying flat and isn't supporting my back. Anyway, I start my car and drive off, with a cloud of smoke from my screeching tires. It's hard driving a car with nothing holding up your upper body, but I managed. As I leave, I look in the rear mirror, and I can see how the dude stands there and looks at me, and I can see 2 more guys coming up beside him. What I can see in the silhouette of their beams, one of them has something in his hand, like a wrench or a crowbar. I drove super fast, way over the speed limit. My whole body was trembling with adrenaline and fear. I drove like that for like 30 minutes, then I stopped at a gas station to fix my seat and put my shoes on again. I figured out I was only sleeping for like 10 minutes. Well, I didn't have to sleep until I got to my destination, which is surrounded by heavy-duty fencing, and the building has an alarm. I told my boss the next day, and he said they actually have problems with what we call it in Sweden road pirates, criminals that forces you to stop on the road and rob you of everything, including your car. In that specific area, it could just be 3 nice dudes that wanted to check if I was okay. Then, why didn't they just knock in my driver's window? The thing in his hand could be a big flashlight. Be safe. Here's a picture of the scenery took just before I went to sleep. It wasn't all bad. The staff were great, the pay was decent, and there were all kinds of perks including free day passes. There were lots of reasons to keep the staff coming back. But there was a bigger reason why people left. I spent 2 summers there as a lifeguard and shouldn't have gone back after the first year. But I needed money for college, and since the park itself was only in its 3rd year of operation, I'd have seniority over whoever came back. The place was called Thriller World, and to understand it, you need to know its history. The park was a large plot of land at the base of the Trembly Mountains. In the early 1920s, it was the location of a coal mine that dropped 1,000 feet straight down into the earth. It was a working and profitable mine for 30 years, but closed its shutters in the late 50s. The mine was owned by the Phelps family. Randall Phelps was one of the more industrious of the clan, and he stepped up to develop the land in the 60s to create a ski hill and resort. The mountain was long and treacherous, and attracted enough customers over the years to invest in some minor improvements, but still they were barely breaking even. So Randall came up with an idea to use the land in the summer months. And that idea was Thriller World. It was an amusement park that would include all manner of rides, as well as physical aquatic adventures. There was an insane wave pool, tubing around an artificial river with rapids and heavy currents that circled the entire park in a quick-moving moat. There were slides that ran through tubes of varying lengths down the side of the mountain and opened up to a large pool at the center of the park. There was a Big Dipper, bumper cars, one of those pendulum rides, a fast-moving Ferris wheel, a human trebuchet and giant safety net, a teacup spinner, a carousel, a grand, haunted mansion. There were shooting and throwing games and prizes and food vendors. There was even a zip line over top of the entire park that would continually get stuck in the middle. And then there was the attraction that sparked Randall's imagination to create the whole thing. It was called Thrill Racer and was a race from the top of the mountain to the very bottom. You basically strapped yourself to an engineless, lightweight bumper car, which had flimsy hand brakes you could use to try to slow down. Outside of that, the speed was entirely gravity-driven by the steep slope down the mountainside. The path of Thrill Racer wasn't straight down, but zigzagged around corners marked by large rocks with arrows painted on them. The ride down took just under 3 minutes on average, but some of the workers would stay after hours and try to set records. This is where I first experienced death at Thriller World. It was my first summer and my second full week working there as a lifeguard. I'd saved 2 kids from near drownings in the wave pool and was feeling shell-shocked. Davis, one of the older lifeguards who'd coached me since I'd started, told me all kinds of stories about the previous summer and the injuries and deaths that he'd witnessed in the park's first year operating. I think the stories were meant to be comforting. What Davis said it came down to was, this place wasn't a picnic. It was dangerous, and people who weren't ready for that attracted problems to themselves. The accidents were almost always the customer ignoring the rules. There was the occasional freak accident, and then very rarely, a ride malfunction. But he reiterated, Thriller World wasn't the county fair. It was a place you had to keep your eyes and ears open. And there was a reason why, amongst its staff, Thriller World had adopted a nickname drenched in blood. Killer World. Somehow it made me feel better knowing that others were aware of what was going on, but weren't worried. And Davis had that young and invincible teenage edge to him that was infectious to anyone who didn't. Like me. I found myself drunk with some of the girls who worked the game's tents. We watched as several of the operations and maintenance staff of the park were set to race 4 of the lifeguards down the mountain on the go-karts. Davis was one of the lifeguards. The maintenance guys brought a box of flares, and each of the carts was fitted with one along the back bumper. One of the lifeguards, Kara, went up to the top of the hill with a scarf to be the countdown girl. When Kara said ready, everyone readied their flares. When she said set, everyone lit their flares. Kara yelled go, loud enough for it to echo down the mountain to us at the bottom. We watched as the racers took off, their red flares spraying out and illuminating them as the go-karts took corners and ripped down the straightaways. It was exhilarating being in the group as we all cheered for the different drivers and teams. Several of the carts were pulling away, with one far ahead of the rest. The leader was hitting corners hard and didn't seem to be using the brakes at all. Then it lost control. The go-kart hit a corner too sharp and it flipped, sending the driver colliding head first off a large boulder and into a violent tumble down the side of the mountain. Screams pierced out as the go-kart, lit by the red flare, launched into the air before crashing down and spinning and tumbling all the way to the bottom of the mountain. The body was still halfway up. Everyone who was watching ran up the side of the mountain. By the time we got there, the maintenance staff and the lifeguards who'd been racing were circled around the body. It was Davis, though it didn't really look like a person. It looked like a plush toy with all the stuffing taken out. Davis's girlfriend Molly, another lifeguard who'd been cheering beside me, rushed over and dropped beside his body. She tried to pick him up and hold him, but found Davis's body was like picking up wet laundry. The bones and muscles were pulverized. Molly tried to touch Davis's face, but even that was like a large Ziploc bag overfilled with lasagna. The investigation revealed that Davis had been going too fast and lost control. The go-kart he'd used was destroyed in its fall, so it was difficult to tell if the brakes had been working. But there were no marks on the pavement. Either way, it was pushed aside, and by Tuesday, everything at the park was back to normal. Except Molly never came back. I didn't blame her. I developed a drinking problem that summer, but managed to get it under control by the time I left for school. I told myself I wouldn't work at Thriller World the following summer, but when time came to look for a job, there was little else in town that was hiring. I went back for my second summer, trying to convince myself it wasn't as bad as I remembered. The Thrill Racer was back in operation, as were all the other dangerous rides. But this year there was a new one. At Thriller World, management always offered money to any of its employees who would test the new rides themselves, both for entertainment and safety. But in their newest ride, no employee would test it. It was called the Mine Drop. Over the winter, Randall had brought in engineers to work on the mine, reinforce its structure and update, and adapt its elevator to one that moves at an unnerving speed up and down. The elevator would take 10 people at a time and drop them 1,000 feet down into the pitch black. Since there'd been a cave-in at the bottom of the mine in the 1950s which resulted in its closure, there wasn't anywhere to go down there. So the elevator would slowly bring them back up. There was talk of adding in stops along the way up, where riders could get off and explore certain closed-in areas of the mine. Perhaps even adapt the haunted mansion into the tunnel systems. But it never got to that point. In fact, it never even opened to the public. Randall paid 10 people from a local shelter to come test out the mine drop after we'd all refused. The elevator reached the bottom and was halfway back up when all 3 safety mechanisms malfunctioned and the elevator dropped to the bottom. All 10 people were killed on impact. Their bodies were found in a pile of pulverized bone and meat. Randall did an exemplary job of keeping the details from the public, as he did with all the accidents that occurred. But the events of the rest of the summer couldn't be kept quiet. It seemed like every week, the injuries got worse and another body was added to the pile. In the wave pool, there were drownings from children being pulled into the suction generators. When the bodies were found, it was discovered they hadn't drowned. Their bodies had somehow been pulverized by the jets. Their bones and muscles liquefied. In the artificial river rapids that circled the park, there were a variety of strange deaths, including drownings and electrocutions from the underwater fans and the ungrounded electricity that circulated through the park. The lifeless bodies would be carried by the ongoing current around the park's moat until they were pulled out by special lifeguards referred to as pickers. One afternoon, I arrived for a shift, and as I passed the entrance, I saw the bodies of 2 boys, one after the other, face down, floating by like logs taken downstream in a heavy current. Apparently, they were on their second lap around the park and none of the pickers had seen them. Their bodies, too, were pulverized. But those were explained away as the bodies being tossed and bounced off the walls and fake rocks in the artificial river. I remember pulling one kid out of the water who'd just been on the edge of drowning. His body was covered in bruises. I heard him talk about hands. Hands in the water. Hands squeezing him. Hands pulling him down. I never managed to find the kid after that to ask him more, but I heard he moved away. The final nail in the coffin of Thriller World came at the end of August. And it involved Thriller House, the park's haunted mansion. The mansion was built specifically for the park and was filled with hidden rooms and stairwells and shifting walls. It was easy to get lost in it, and people did. A lot. In fact, it was the attraction that seemed to cause the most issues among the people who used it. There were several kids who went missing inside. Because of the scale of the mansion and the shifting walls, some weren't found for hours. When they were finally discovered, it was always in the House of Mirrors room in the basement. And the children were always babbling incoherently. Thriller House also had a secret way up to the attic that most customers didn't find. Some of the other employees would go up there to drink sometimes after shifts. I joined them after one bad Wednesday. I was uneasy the whole time. The room was huge, and there were only 6 of us, but it felt like the area was filled with breathing bodies pressing in on you. No one else seemed to notice, but I couldn't shake it. Then the power cut out. The mansion creaked like an old home, even though it only looked like one. When we left, the walls leading to the doors out shifted on us and led us down to the basement, where we got lost for a half hour in the pitch black of the terrifying cellar. There were all kinds of frightening statues and props dangling from the walls and ceiling. We thought we were going to spend all night down there, but I finally found the hidden door leading up to the first floor. We got out and all went our separate ways. It wasn't until the next day at work when we found out a younger lifeguard named Jill hadn't come home last night after her shift. She was one of the people who'd been drinking with us in the attic. We all thought back and realized she hadn't come out of the basement with us. None of us saw her again after we left the attic. We agreed to go and tell our supervisors what we knew, but we never got the chance. While we were meeting to discuss what happened, a father had gone into Thriller House with his family and discovered the way up to the attic. In the attic, several of the floorboards broke and the family of 4 fell through. They landed on a group of 5 people below them on the second floor. The second floor then collapsed onto 8 people on the first floor, which then collapsed into the basement, and 3 more people who'd just discovered Jill's body. In all, 2 were dead and 17 were trapped in the basement under the rubble. The survivors were near paralyzed, all with the same injuries involving pulverized bones and muscles. As paramedics and firemen filled the mansion and lowered into the basement to start the rescue mission, an aggressive electrical fire started and caused the near-immediate collapse of all the weakened floors. 8 members of emergency services were crushed under the rubble and unable to escape the basement inferno as it burned out of control. I left after that shift, and the park never reopened. If Thriller House wasn't enough, dozens of other lawsuits had piled up over the summer, and a federal investigation was underway. The Phelps family sold the property to pay off the lawsuits, and as far as I can tell, there were never any criminal charges or jail time for anyone. A few families of the victims got settlements, but that was about it. Most people think what happened at Thriller World was negligence, cutting corners and saving costs. But in the years that followed, I did my own research into the mountain and uncovered some history that disturbed me. The ski resort in the winter had similar, strange, and disturbing injuries and deaths as Thriller World. There were electrocutions on the ski lifts, killing multiple riders as well as operators. There were other electrocutions, most of them in the hot tubs in the personal chalets. 5 skiers were decapitated by an overhead metal wire that had fallen across the route down the mountain. There were horrific downhill crashes resulting in disfigurement and, in many cases, dismemberment. Somehow, all the bodies had the same, specific trait in common: they were pulverized. So I researched further back and started finding difficult answers. When the mine was shut down in the 1950s, it was because of a miners' strike. The strike was being led by 12 men who'd constantly been at odds with the Phelps family over pushing union affiliation. Details were hazy, but a late-night meeting was to be held in the mines among the miners and the Phelps. But there was a cave-in. All 12 of the miners' representatives were killed. None of the Phelps family had gone down to meet them. The miners' bodies were eventually found, but an investigation was stalled and then closed, due to the Phelps family's ties to local and state governments. The bodies of the miners were said to all be the same, pulverized. The muscle and bones liquefied by the collapsed tunnel they'd been told to go to.